Hello, today we're going to focus on the remaining parts of the senses, including hearing, smell, and taste. So what hearing is they're sensory receptors that respond to the vibration in the air around us. So when vision was about perceiving different wavelengths of light, hearing is about perceiving different frequencies of vibrations within the air around us. Talking about some of the parts of the ear, the part of the ear that most of us are aware of, first of all, would be our auditory canal. And the auditory canal is the tube that leads from the outside of the ear to the eardrum. The eardrum is a membrane that causes the bones in the ear to vibrate when hit by sound waves. So sound waves first get there by traveling through the auditory canal to the eardrum, and then when sound waves reach the eardrum vibrates, which then causes the bones in the ear to vibrate. The bones in the ear that vibrate are called the auditory ossicles. The definition of the auditory ossicles are bones in the ear that conduct sound waves from the eardrum to the cochlea. Now, up until this part, if you have a problem with your ear that affects either the auditory canal, the eardrum, or the auditory ossicles, those kind of hearing losses can be worked on by making the sound louder. Okay, and if you're using a lot of very loud sounds, like those of you students who wear earbuds in your ear but play the music so loudly I can hear you across the room, those are the parts of your ear that you're damaging, sometimes very severely, when you play music that loud. Attached to the auditory ossicles is the cochlea. Now the cochlea is the portion of the ear that transfers the mechanical waves, the vibrations that we've been talking about so far, into electrical nerve impulses. And it has to be transformed into electrical impulses before it can go to the brain. Let's take a quick break here and switch over to the picture of the ear, and let's talk about what we found so far. So to start with, we need to be able to identify where the auditory canal is. And I'm going to circle the auditory canal in orange. The auditory canal is the hole that is in your ear. Remember, don't stick anything in there. And it ends at the eardrum. And I'm going to switch over to blue. And the eardrum is this part right here. It's a thin membrane. If you've ever had an ear infection and your doctor looks in your ear, what they're looking for is if you have an ear infection, your eardrum will kind of start to bow outward. And so they can at least tell that you have fluid in your ear. Can't really tell if it's infected from that, but they can tell that you have some fluid in there. The next thing that we learned about were the auditory ossicles. And the auditory ossicles are here. That's the first one. Here's the second one, and it ends in the third one. Now each of these have different names, but for this class we're just going to focus on being able to identify that the three of these are the auditory ossicle. So if you start from the outside, you have the auditory canal, the eardrum, the auditory ossicle, and then we run into the cochlea. The cochlea is this part of the ear that looks like a snail. In fact, the name cochlea comes from the Latin root for snail. This is the part of your ear where the mechanical waves that was a mess. Where the mechanical waves that have traveled from the outside of your ear to this part are changed into electrical waves. Okay, so this is the auditory canal, eardrum, auditory ossicles, cochlea. Okay, now we're going to switch back to the PowerPoint, talk about some new parts of the ear. The next part of the ear doesn't have anything directly to do with hearing, but these are parts of your ear that you need, well, for a variety of other things. So the first thing we're going to talk about are your semicircular canals. Now I get sick every time I go on roller coasters, and this is because my semicircular canals are very sensitive. What your semicircular canals are is they're sections of your inner ear that senses the position of your head compared to gravity. In other words, it figures out if your head starts moving to one side or the other, it sends impulses to your brain that help you keep your balance. Okay? This is why sometimes when you have an ear infection or you have fluid in your ears, you can start to lose your balance. That's because the pressure of the fluid in the ear starts messing up the signals from the semicircular canals. Now, to prevent fluid from building up in the ears, there's another structure called the eustachian tube. The eustachian tubes connect the inner ears to the throat. And what they do is they keep fluid from building up in the ear. One of the reasons that children have so many ear infections is because their eustachian tube is smaller and more narrow. So if they get a cold, the eustachian tube will sometimes be pinched shut and the fluid will build up in the ear. As you get older, your eustachian tube gets wider, and so that makes it less likely to happen. Let's go take a look at the drawing of the ear to take a look at the semicircular canals and the eustachian tube. Let's see, I don't know what color I haven't done yet, so I'm going to go with orange again. The semicircular canals are up here. There are 3 of them, 1 in each direction. So we have 1 here, we have 1 here, and we have 1 here. Notice that they go in each of the 3 major directions, side to side, up and down, and back and forth. So between those 3, you can sense movement in any direction. The eustachian tube I'm going to draw in pink. To find the eustachian tube, if you can find your auditory ossicles, there's a space below it. This is your middle ear. And then this tube down here that goes to your throat is the eustachian tube. Okay, I imagine you can see how if all of a sudden, if we pinched it off, say right here, if this swelled shut, fluid could build up in your inner ear. Okay. Going back to our notes. Okay. We need to cover the last bit that is on taste and smell. Now, we think of taste and smell as being 2 different senses, but they're related to each other, because taste and smell are both sensory receptors that are capable of differentiating between chemicals. And for humans, our sense of smell is very much stronger than our sense of taste. The sense of smell, humans can differentiate between thousands of smells. Now, it sounds like a lot, but most dogs, most other mammals, are much better at smelling things than humans are. We've got a fairly weak sense of smell compared to other mammals. On the other hand, our taste, most of the time when you taste food, you're actually smelling the food. And the proof I can give you of this is if you ever think about when you have a cold, a lot of times the food you eat when you have a cold tastes very bland, tastes kind of yucky. And that's because without the smell, we can only taste 4 different sensations: sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. I'm pretty sure that's the last slide for today, so I hope you've learned something on hearing, taste, and smell. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me during school hours. Have a great day.